Abram traded his home in Ur to become the father of a nation. Ruth traded her homeland to become the great-grandmother to a king. Moses and David traded their sheep to become leaders of Israel. Peter and Andrew traded their nets to become fishers of men. Mary traded her housework to sit at the feet of Christ. Saul traded his prestige to become Paul, a leader of the church. St. Augustine traded a life of debauchery to author over 100 works promoting the gospel of Christ. Albert Schweitzer traded a successful career to train as a doctor and establish a hospital in Africa. Rachel Saint traded her grief to dwell among the natives who had killed her brother. Corrie ten Boom traded anger and resentment to forgive a brutal Nazi guard who put his faith in Christ. John and Betty Stam traded their lives to testify of Christ in communist China. Cameron traded the money he spent on Starbucks for 40 days to raise money for water wells in Uganda. Dale traded extra hours of work climbing the corporate ladder to mentor fatherless boys in his neighborhood through basketball. Sarah traded her teaching career in Dallas to teach Muslim children in Morocco. Heather traded comfort and routine to be a foster parent to children in need. They put their faith in action, being intentional with their time, money, and passions, so that they could bring the love of Christ to the world. What are you willing to trade?
Whenever I'm on vacation or visiting relatives, anywhere where I can get free access to cable that I'm too cheap to pay for, and they have the History Channel, I'll look to see if Pawn Stars is playing. Oh, some of you do too, okay? One of those shows, it's one of my favorite shows. It's set in a pawn shop in Las Vegas, and I know we kind of might ask ourselves, why is a show about predatory lending on the History Channel? What would that have to do? Well, the show really is highlighted by the last line of the introduction, in which Rick, the owner, says, "You never know what is going to come through those doors." And really, the show it works because the folks bring their items that maybe they found in an attic, or they inherited from a grandparent, or they purchased at an auction a long time ago, some memorabilia that they have kept with them that they believe has some value, and they bring it into the store to sell it to the pawn shop, and for whatever purpose. And so the show just kind of features all this really cool historical memorabilia and trinkets and Civil War items, jewelry, just really cool parts of a lot of times of our American history. And so it's really kind of fun to watch that. What really makes the show work, though, is the drama in the show that comes about in every transaction, in which Rick turns to the person having described it and said, "Well, how much are you looking to get for it?" And then the music starts to play, and the drama starts in as the guy kind of names what he wants, and they go through the negotiations, and we're wondering, is there going to be a sale or is there not, because of how valuable everybody thinks it is. I remember one of the episodes, a guy walked into the door with a cigar box that he claimed was personally owned by John F. Kennedy, and had the little nameplate down there. And of course, they've usually done a little bit of research on their own. He says, "Well, how do we know that it actually belonged to him?" And the man pulls out this auction catalog that was an auction some time ago of some of JFK's personal effects, and it was listed in there, and they had a picture of this cigar box, and it said it had 11 cigars, and they weren't quite sure why there's only 9 still left, but they had a little conversation about that, and it matched up, and he said, "Okay, it's the real thing," and then it's time for the drama. He says, "So how much are you looking to get for it?" And the guy says, "Well, I have a large personal collection. I'm trying to raise some money to be able to buy some property where I can showcase my collection. And, well, another one of these we know that was another one of JFK's cigar boxes sold for $500,000. And he said, "Yeah, but this one's different. I know it's probably not worth that much. And someone had estimated that it would go for $150,000. And he said, "But I'd like to get $90,000 out of it." And Rick says, "Well, I can't do 90. I'll give you 50. And the drama continues, Is the guy going to go as low as 50 for something he knows that's more than 50? And he says, "Well, I can't really do 50. How about 70? I'll give you 70. Well, I'll take 70 for it." And Rick comes up a little bit and says, "Oh, 60. And he says, how about 65? And no, I can't do 65. How about 60? And we're all wondering, what's he going to settle on? And finally, they shake hands at $60,000, and the guy walks out. And they always ask him, "Are you happy with what you got?" And sometimes they're a little bit frustrated, right? Say, "Oh, it was worth so much more than that." To which the audience asked, well, then why did you settle for it? Because it's just like our mom always told us, right? Something is only worth what someone is willing to pay for it. Let's push that a little bit further, though. If you have something and you're wondering what it's worth, it's not only worth somebody is willing to pay for it, but it's worth to you whatever you're willing to accept for it. And so the people who walk out of the store frustrated and mad because they didn't get what it was worth, well, they got to own up to the truth that if they were willing to do the deal, that's all it was worth to them. That's what its value was to them, is whatever you're willing to accept in trade for what you think is valuable. So a couple years ago, after my grandparents had passed away, my mom's side, and they had cleaned out my grandmother's house, and all of the siblings had divided up some of the items that they wanted. My mom gave me this pocket watch, and she said that they found it in some of Grandma's belongings and believed that it either belonged to her mother or her grandmother, and so it had, it was kind of a historical family item, and I took a look at it. It's kind of cool, you hit the top and it pops open and you can see what time it is and can wind it and hear it, that it's actually ticking and keeping time, and I thought, what a cool little item. And of course, noticed that the second hand had broken off and was kind of falling around inside of the case. And so took that out and taped it on the back. And so I thought, wow, what a really cool little item. My mom said, yeah, I don't know if it's, don't know if it's worth anything, or if you want it, or if you want to sell it, whatever you want to do, And so I want to know. So I got on a plane and I went to Las Vegas and go talk to Rick at the pawn shop, And, no, not really, But I'd watched enough episodes to know what you do. You get online and you try to find out what's going on with it. And so I got online and I started typing in any numbers and information and whatever I could find on it. It says that it's made by Elgin. So I'm like, Elgin pocket watches. And I do a little research and I found out a couple of things. I found out, first of all, that by the size of it, it is a woman's pocket watch, that a man's pocket watch would have been much larger. And so, yeah, very well could have belonged to a grandmother, great-grandmother. Discovered also that when pocket watches were purchased, the watch, the motor mechanism, was purchased separately from the case. And so if you're going to do the research, you have to research the timepiece and the case separately. And so the numbers on the case don't necessarily match up with the numbers on the timepiece. And they're two different things, two different companies maybe even. So I had to do that. I discovered that Elgin watch faces have a serial number on the back. And so I popped the back off of it, typed the serial number into the lookup web page, and discovered that indeed this watch had been manufactured around 1910 or 1911, which was consistent with my great-grandmother, or could have belonged to her mother as well, consistent with the time period, and discovered, wow, I've really got something here. This is really kind of cool piece of family history. But you don't really care about that, do you? You're asking one question. What is it worth? Obviously not very much, since I still have it, right? And indeed, that's what I found out, only worth a few dollars, in which case we would say it doesn't have any value. But it does. It has what we might call sentimental value, which is a nice way of saying nobody would pay anything for it, but the only reason you're keeping it around is because it has some type of a family collection, family, connection, and some of you, maybe kind of like in our household, have had some discussions about why we have to have so much stuff that only has sentimental value, and why does everything have to have sentimental value? But this is not my counseling session, so we'll move on from that. But here's why we kind of bring this up today. We're talking about values, and just like your valuables have a value of whatever you'd be willing to receive and trade for it, that's what his value is to you. Just like our valuables have a value, our values have a value. Last week, we started this discussion of values. And we started off by saying that your life and my life is the result of your values. That all of your decisions and everywhere you go and everything you do, your life is just the result of whatever you think is most important. And whatever's most important to you, we call those your values. You make your decisions according to your values and how you spend your time, how you spend your money, where you go, what you do, where you get what you give your emotional energy to. And so your life is merely the result of your values. The unfortunate thing is so many people who just kind of drift through life and they aren't aware of what they truly value and why they're doing what they're doing. And so we said the first thing that we start off with is bringing our values from unknown to known, from unconscious to conscious. That we need to own up to and accept what we value. The second part of your homework was to get honest about what you value and to answer the question, what do I value really? I mean, there's things I claim that I value, but what do I value really? In other words, we asked it this way. We said, what do I claim to value that when I look at my life would disagree with? Say that I'm not being quite honest. That if you claim to value your family, but you're never around, your family might say, you don't really value us. When there's a gap between what I claim to value and what I actually value, I've got some work to do. And that the reality is for all of us, until you know your values and can be honest about your values and embrace your values, your future is going to look just like your past until you deal with your values. So we're taking a couple weeks. We're saying, Lord, help us to be honest about what is most important to us. And Lord, would you lead us? Because here's what we really want as followers of Jesus. We want to value the things God values. And whatever God wants me to have as most important in my life, that's what I want to actually be most important in my life. But that'll never happen until we have this conversation about values and begin to write it down and own up to it and value it. And so here's what we're talking about today. Just like our valuables have a value, so your values have a value. A study from several years ago looked at what people value and what they claim to value and whether their life matches up with what they claim to value. And so in this particular research study, 77% of the people interviewed agreed with the statement, I am a very compassionate person. 60% of the people said that political leaders should show empathy towards each other. So knowing what they claim to value, they then asked the question, what would it take for you to throw a rotten tomato at a politician that you don't like? Now, when I read this survey, I think this was taken before the last presidential election, because I think things have changed. I think, people would answer differently, but regardless. Now, that a lot of us is throw a rotten tomato. That's just weird. Well, when we look back at history, that was kind of a thing at a certain time period, is if there was a politician you disagreed with, I don't know if they just had extra rotten tomatoes around and they needed something to do with them, or there was some type of a metaphorical connection between tomatoes and politicians. I don't know, but it was the thing to do if you disagreed and you were angry, that you would throw rotten tomatoes at politicians. And then at some point, we must have said, you know what, that is so undignified, and we value respect and honor. And I'm just so glad that we value open respect and conversation, and we honor our politicians these days, that we don't do that anymore. So, you're okay, good, you got that one. No, so anyways, so the researcher said, but what would it take to literally throw a rotten tomato at a politician? And so one group of people, so here's what they found. This is of this group of people that said, 77% said I'm very compassionate, 60% said that political leaders should show empathy towards each other. Out of that group, 20% of people said for $10,000, they would throw a rotten tomato at a politician. Well, that means that a whole bunch of people, they just wouldn't do it, right? I'm not going to do it. So they raised the amount. An additional 6% of people interviewed said that for $100,000, they would throw a rotten tomato at a politician they didn't like. For another 10% of people, $1 million was their bottom line. If you raise it up to $1 million, I won't do it for $100,000, but for $1 million, I will throw a rotten tomato at a politician that I don't like. Now, when you add in the 13% of people who said that they would do it for free, you get to right about 50% of the people who were interviewed said that for a price, they would throw a rotten tomato at a politician. The same group of people who considered themselves very compassionate and believed that politicians should show empathy towards each other, for a price, they could be bought. In other words, their value had a value. For some it was 10,000, for some it was 100, for some it was 1,000,000. All right, now I know, most of us haven't really handled $1 million, or maybe, and that $1 million just isn't quite what it used to be, chump change and all. But so how about we increase it to 10 million? So another study asked people, what would you be willing to do for $10 million? This is really where it gets disturbing. 25% of people said they would abandon their families. 16% of people said they would give up their citizenship. Another 16% of folks interviewed said that they would leave their spouse for $10 million. 7% of people said for $10 million, they would murder a stranger. 3% of people said they would put their kids up for adoption. $10 million. Now, I know it's a hypothetical situation, and most of us will never be put in a situation like that, but it illustrates the concept, doesn't it? That just like our valuables have a value, so do our values have a value. And we need to ask ourselves, just how much do I value what I claim to value? What are your values worth to you? You see, last week, I'm guessing that as you put some of your values on paper and kind of did that homework last week and said, here's my values. Maybe you put integrity, honesty, honor pretty high on the list, because life doesn't work, relationships don't work, society doesn't work if we're not honest, and I value being honest. Yeah, maybe you can think back at a time where in a tough situation, you weren't quite honest. And you were willing to trade in your value of honesty for something, to get the deal done, for them to maintain respect, whatever it may be, that your value of honesty had a price. So we need to talk about how much do I really truly value the things that I value and what's my price. We see this in the Bible in Genesis chapter 25. If you want to read along and follow along with our story today, there's a story of two brothers and a discussion of what was most important to them and the price they would accept to trade in what they claimed to value. So Genesis chapter 25, we see the story of Isaac and Rebekah, who are kind of in this line of patriarchs of the Jewish family and the Jewish tradition, and their sons, Jacob and Esau. They had two sons, they were twins, and there was some family drama and family conflict, and here's what happened, and this is a story about values, right? So Genesis chapter 25, we'll pick it up at verse 24. When the time came for her to give birth, there were twin boys in her womb. The first to come out was red, and his whole body was like a hairy garment, so they named him Esau, which means hairy. After this, his brother came out with his hand grasping Esau's heel, so he was named Jacob. Isaac, the father, was 60 years old when Rebekah gave birth to them. The boys grew up, and Esau, the oldest, became a skillful hunter, a man of the open country, while Jacob was content to stay at home among the tents. Isaac, the father, who had a taste for wild game, he loved Esau, the oldest. But Rebekah, their mother, loved Jacob, the youngest. Are you picking up on a little bit of the drama here? Are you seeing a little bit of the conflict? First, we can see that there are two boys and that there is some favoritism in the family. That Isaac, the dad, he loves wild game, and his oldest son, Esau, who came out with hair all over him, and so they named him Harry, not like Harry, but Hairy. He's the hunter, and he provides wild game, which his dad happens to like, and so dad favors the older son. Jacob, he's content to stay at home, stay among the tents, and he probably was teased for being a mama's boy, and that's kind of how he's described. And what do you know? Mom favors him. And if you grew up in a family where there was favoritism and one kid was favored by mom or dad, you know how awkward and dysfunctional that was. And even if you were the kid who was favored, You liked it because you got cool stuff, but it was weird and it was awkward, and you wish parents and family members could just treat everybody equally. So we've already got kind of a dysfunctional family situation going on here. Then we have this issue of names. In a culture where what your name meant was more than just, oh, that's pretty cool because you looked it up in a meaning of names book, but it was like, the meaning of your name was almost like a prophecy of what your life would be, or this prophecy of who you are, your identity as a person. And so Esau comes out, and he has this ruddy complexion, his skin is very red, and he's very hairy, and so they name him Hairy Child. I mean, are you seriously? That's weird. But, and so then he just kind of becomes this tough and rough hunter, outdoorsman. He just kind of lives the image that would, he just lived the life that image would lead to. Jacob comes out, and like when he is born, it's kind of a weird thing to try to imagine, but he is born holding onto the heel of his older brother Esau. And so they name him Jacob, which means heel grasper. Now, the phrase heel grasper in their culture, though, meant something. Heel grasper meant a deceiver, a trickster, a con man. Imagine growing up with that name. Hey, there goes the little deceiver kid. Hey, there goes the little con man. And you know what kids who are called a con man grow up to? To be con men who run cons. That's what he does. The third factor in this story is this issue of oldest versus youngest. Dad was a nomad, a rancher, a farmer. He had flocks and herds and lots of livestock and was very, very wealthy at the time. And it was kind of the family business, and it was just understood that you worked with the family business. But when Dad passed away, his assets and his herds were divided up among the sons, and the cultural tradition at the time was that the oldest son received a double inheritance. So whatever all the other sons, you just divide up all the assets, and the oldest son gets twice as much as any of the younger sons. So there's two brothers, right? Which means in their situation, the oldest son gets 2/3 of the father's assets. The youngest son gets 1/3 of the father's assets. The oldest son is going to kind of carry on the name and the lineage and the tradition and the honor, and that's just kind of how they did it. And so if you were the younger son, you knew that you would get half of the inheritance of your brother. Jacob, the con man's son, knows this. And look at what happens next in the story. Verse 29, once when Jacob was cooking some stew, Esau, the older brother, came in from the open country, famished. He said to Jacob, quick, let me have some of that red stew. I'm famished. This is why he was also called Edom. Jacob, the con man, watching for an opportunity, sees that this is it, and he capitalizes on the opportunity. Verse 31, Jacob replied, first, sell me your birthright. I'll give you a bowl of stew in exchange for the rights that you have of the oldest son. The rights to the inheritance, the rights to the honor, the double inheritance. All your rights that come along with being the oldest son, trade it to me. Give me the rights, and I'll give you your soup. Now, at this point, any sane, mature person would say, no way. Look what he says, though. Verse 32, look, I'm about to die, Esau said. What good is the birthright to me? To which we look at that story and we're like, Esau, what are you, like 12? Sorry, I hope I don't have any 12-year-olds. I don't mean to insult you, but, we'll just pick another, because mom and dad, you've had that happen, right? A couple times. Like you're in the process of making dinner, getting dinner ready, and the kid comes in like, I'm hungry, when is dinner? I'm starving. I'm going to starve to death if I don't eat. And you're like, you just had a snack like 20 minutes ago. You're fine. No, I'm starving. And you're like, you don't know what starving is. Let's take a trip to Africa. I'll show you some starving, right? That's what we've got going on here. He's like, you're starving, and he says, I'm so hungry, I'm starving, I'm going to die, and if I don't get something to eat, I'll die, and if I die, what good is my birthright to me then? Really? But that's what you do when you're immature, isn't it? I mean, think about your own life. You think back to when you were immature. Hopefully that's in the past tense. And here's what we do when we're mature. We value some things really highly, and then other things have low value. But you know what the process of maturity does? It helps us recognize that some of the things we used to hold in high regard aren't worth all that much after all. And the things we used to value with little value are actually really valuable. We do it all the time with our health, right? When you're young and you're healthy and you're strong and you think that you're invincible and you're unconquerable and you don't take care of your body and you don't get good rest, you don't exercise all that much and you eat whatever you want and never gain any weight and you're just invincible. And we value our health and our body really pretty low. But then you get older and you just, you don't recover as quick and you're more tired and you have aches and pains and those types of things. I've seen it every single time. We recognize I used to value my body and my health really low, but now I'm recognizing my body's important and it's limited and I need to take care of myself, and we change the value, how we value our health, and all of a sudden it becomes really, really important. That's part of maturity. And there's some things that we used to think were just so important. We're like, in the grand scheme of things, not all that important. And right now in Esau's life, we see what's important to him. Living in the moment. Food right now. And we see what he values. How about Jacob, though? What does Jacob value? Looking at this story. Your life is a result of your values. What does he value? Money, wealth, position. What does he not value? Relationships. Family. He's willing to drive a wedge into his relationship with his brother because he values money and a double inheritance more. And his brother values a $3 bowl of soup more than $1 million inheritance. But let's talk about Jacob for a minute, because that's not the end of the story. We see that he really, truly values money, wealth, and position way more than family and relationships. You see, the story's not over. He's basically tricked and deceived his brother into trading him the rights of the firstborn, but still his father has to give the blessing, and his father's the one who hands out the inheritance. And so the next chapter in the story is his father's getting old, and he can't see very well, and he calls his sons before him, and he says, it's time for me to hand out the blessing and to name, and I give you your blessing, your inheritance, and just kind of tell you what your inheritance, your blessing, all that's going to be. And so dad has to be in on it, and they're not going to go to dad and say, hey, he sold me his birthright, so whatever blessing you were going to give to him, you have to give to me, because it wouldn't have worked that way. So in the story, Jacob, the con man, cons his own dad and tricks him into thinking he is his older brother by having his mom make his father's favorite stew, putting animal skins on his arms so it feels like he has hairy arms, and wears his brother's clothes because his dad can't see very well at this point, and he tricks and cons his dad into giving him his brother's blessing. And in a culture of that, then when his brother came later and his dad finds out that he's been tricked and deceived by the younger brother, he says, I already gave the best blessing. I've already pronounced it. I can't give it to you. I can give you a secondary blessing, but it's not the one of your brother. And the older brother, Esau, even though he made the trade fair and square, he is angry, and he is so angry at his older brother that he vows that he will hunt him down and kill him. You know, we said, your life is the result of your values. And so what does Jacob do? He has to flee to a land that's far away, and he lives with some relatives for the next 20 years. And he misses out on 20 years of time with mom and dad. He misses out on 20 years of watching nieces and nephews grow up. He misses out on 20 years of relationship with his brother and any closeness he might have ever had with his brother, because he traded it in for money and wealth. Your life is just the result of what's most important to you. Be careful with what you value. That's what we see, right? What about Esau? Look what we find at the very end of the story, verse 35. And he despised his birthright. That's what was most important to him. Now, we keep reading, and it seems like maybe the story has a happy ending and things change, and they come to their senses about what's truly important. At the end of the 20 years, Jacob is ready to go back home, and he wants to see his mother and father before they die. And so he makes his way back home, but he is scared that his brother is still hunting him down. And so he makes his way home, and he kind of figures out a way to pacify his brother. He takes several of his, and in those 20 years, he's made a lot of money. He's kind of just living with family and friends and deceiving some relatives. He builds up his own flocks and herds, and he's very, very, very wealthy. As he comes back, he sends a gift of some of his cattle and livestock. He sends them ahead of him as a gift to pacify his brother. If you add up the value of that livestock, it could be about $500,000 or so worth of a gift that he gives to him that he pulls from his herd. So he's done really well for himself. The night before he meets his brother, God meets him in a dream. He has a spiritual encounter with God that really begins to change his heart. And the next day, he and his brother reunite. His brother says, "What is the deal with all those flocks and herds that you sent on ahead of you?" And he said, "I know how much you hate me, and I just wanted to pay it back, and I wanted to give a gift to you." And look what he says in a couple chapters later, Genesis chapter 33, verse 11. "Please accept the present that was brought to you, for God has been gracious to me, and I have all I need." While he valued money and wealth and possessions over relationships, and he would drive a wedge in a relationship between his brother and his father so that he could have a double inheritance, now 20 years later, he has more than he needs, and he recognizes that he has enough. But he doesn't have a relationship anymore with brother and with mom and dad, and he's coming home. And he has discovered, maybe, possibly, we're not quite sure, but he says it here. He's recognized a new value system of what's most important to life, and money isn't very high on the list. Wealth isn't very high on the list. Just like every valuable has a value, whatever you value has a value. So it's not enough just to say, here are my list of values and the things I value in life. We need to know, what do you value the most? What in your life is so important, it is at the top of the list. So last week I asked you just to start making that list of what you truly value. And I didn't really help you with it or give you suggestions. I just said, start making the list. Here's how I want to push this forward one step a little bit more this week. Because a lot of times when we think of our values, we like to it's really easy for us to take a piece of paper, draw a line down the middle, and say, here's what I value, and here's what I don't value. And it's just pretty clear, and that helps me to kind of think through these things. And so maybe your list, I imagine if I looked at a lot of your list of values, you would have put family and faith in the category of the things you value. I shared a little bit with you last week, a little bit of my story, and said that what would go in the don't value for me is lawn care, because I just had to own up to it. And you can listen to the story. If you missed last week's message, go check it out on YouTube. That I just don't value having a nice, green, perfect, manicured lawn. It just takes too much of my life, too much energy. I don't even enjoy it. And so I just had to come to a point where I just said, I don't value that. And it gave me a lot of freedom, right? So that would go in my category of the things that I don't value. Here's the problem with that. You could come over to my house sometime and say, but Jason, I saw you mowing your lawn. You still give time and energy to mowing your lawn. Why are you doing that if you claim that you don't value it? I'm like, well, I don't value it, but I don't want to have a field growing in my backyard. I'm not trying to grow a prairie, and so you still have to mow your lawn. But Jason, if you don't value it, why are you spending any time on it? Which illustrates for us this kind of thinking, it just doesn't really work. Because we just can't really say, I absolutely, not at all, don't value that thing. Maybe a positive example would work a little bit better. So in my list, I would probably, of things I do value, I'd probably put education pretty high. Because for me, it's important to be informed and always be learning. And I'm reading and just trying to stay informed. Eric and I, we've talked, and education is pretty important to us, and we're just pretty much going to insist that our kids go to college, even if they want to do something that doesn't require that, like go to college and then do that, and we just value education, and so we would put that pretty high at the list. Now, some of you may disagree with that, and you do that differently, but you don't want to say that you don't value education. You're like, I'm not stupid or something. I don't value stupidity. We don't want to say that we absolutely don't value something, do we? Because it doesn't really work. It's not really true. So here's what I'd like you to do. And this is a major insight that really helped me when I discovered this a couple years ago. This way of thinking of what I value and what I don't value doesn't work. A better way to do it is just to make one big long list and rank them according to what is important and what is more important and what is less important. That yes, I still spend some time mowing the lawn, but as a value, it's pretty far down the list, and I pretty much spend as little time as possible. But for me, education is going to be pretty high on the list. And you know what? For you, if education is at a different place in your values list, that is okay, and you don't even need to defend yourself about that. If you've brought it before the Lord, and that's who you are, and that's what you value, but I want you to know where it goes on the list. And I believe that when we get honest about what we value, and we make a list of what's important, and what's more important, and what's most important, then we can live with laser focus and give the best of our energy and the most of our energy and time and money to doing what is most important in our lives. So here's your homework for this week. On your way out, our ushers are going to have a homework sheet for you. Because, like I said last week, I didn't give you a bunch of values to pick from. I just said, start with a blank piece of paper and write down some things that are most important to you. And I don't know what you came up with, but I want you to push yourself and to begin to rank those things and have a little more to add to the list. So this homework that you're going to get today is going to have a list of 50 possible values. And if what you wrote down isn't on the list, just add it to the list, okay? And out of all that list of 50, the first thing you'll go do is go through and pick out 15 of them that are the things you value, and you'll write that in the first category of 15. And then, I want you to think about it and pray over it. And out of that list of 15 things that you value, I want you to ask, what do I value more? And narrow it down to 10. The 10 things, and you're going to have to drop 5 off the list, and you say, oh, I value them, but just not as much as I value these other things. And then put it away, walk away, go about your day, come back at it the next day, think about it, pray about it. Take that list of things that you value more and narrow it down even further to the 5 things you value most. And own it and embrace it and say, this is me, and this is my life, and this is what I value, this is what's most important to me. Bring it before the Lord. Make sure that's what the Lord wants you to have on your top 5 list. Receiving that confirmation from Him, you live that. Give your energy to that. Give your time to that. You see, here's what I want for you. I want you that whenever you get to late adulthood in your life, I want you to look back and see how you spent your time, and see how you spent your money, and to see how you spent your energy, and to know that you spent it in all the right places. I don't want you to have to look back and say, I spent my time, I spent my money on things that were not very important, because you know what? You're not just spending your time, you're not just spending your money, you are trading in your life. The one life that we have, you will trade it in for something. And I don't want you to trade it in for something that's pretty low on the list. I want you to get to the end of your life and to look back and with integrity, be able to hold your head high and to praise God and say, I traded in my life for the things that were most important. And that is a life well lived. That's what God wants for you. But you'll never do it if you don't know what your values are. It'll never happen unless you're honest about your values, and it won't happen until you do the hard work to define what is absolutely most important to you. To know that you are trading in your one and only life for that which is most important. Pray with me. God, we want to use our lives to do the most good possible, to help the most people, to do what is most important. God, we want that, and I believe you want that for every person in this room. So Lord, lead us this week. Lord, I pray that you would speak to us so clearly that you would help us to see our lives as you see them. Lord, I pray that you would hold a mirror up to us if we're struggling with the honesty part, to be honest about what's most important. Lord, hold a mirror up to our lives and help us to see our lives as they are. Lord, I pray that you would shine some light in some areas that need to be given more energy and more priority on the list. And God, I pray, would you help us to give the best of ourselves to the top values, the things that are most important to us and to you. Help us, God. We're going to need your help with this. Help us, we ask. In your name, amen.